In the blistering sun of a no-name frontier town, one scrawny cowboy named Zachariah Jones locked eyes with Maribel Hamilton, the 71-year-old heiress of the mighty Hamilton Ranch. Dust swirled at their ankles, and hushed whispers spread like wildfire through the saloon's swinging doors. Why would a grizzled drifter tie the knot with the wealthiest older woman around, destiny, greed, or both? The wedding happened almost overnight. But no one, not even Zachariah, could have imagined the secrets hidden among the ranch's creaking floorboards. A few days after the vows were sealed, a discovery shook him to his bones, unraveling a twisted saga of deceit and desire. Zachariah Jones was born under the harsh sun of the New Mexico Territory. He knew tumbleweeds and cacti better than he knew his own kin. By the time he was 20, he had lost both parents to a smallpox outbreak that ravaged a local mining camp. Grief-stricken and penniless, he wandered from one ranch to the next, picking up odd jobs, sleeping in barns, and saving whatever meager wages he earned. His loyal mare, a chestnut named Flora, was his only true companion through those lonely nights. And it was on her back that he rode into the region near Dodge City, hoping to find honest work and a roof over his head. When he arrived in that dusty two-saloon town, he had exactly $6 in his pocket. The wind carried the acrid smell of horse manure, sweat, and whiskey from the nearby watering holes. He guided Flora along the main street and hopped off near an old feed store, searching for a stable to keep her overnight. The late afternoon sun glistened on his sweat-stained shirt, and his eyes stung from the unrelenting brightness. A ranch hand smoking a cigarette by the feed store eyed Zachariah warily. New in town, he asked, smoke coiling from his lips. Zachariah simply nodded. The ranch hand cocked his head toward a sign across the street that read, "Hamilton Ranch Hiring," in freshly painted letters. Underneath it, listed roles for wranglers, fence repairers, and stable workers. "Might try your luck there," the man said, tipping his hat. That was the first time Zachariah heard the name Hamilton. He needed money. He needed a break. So he walked inside the little makeshift office, introduced himself to a stern foreman named Clyde, and filled out a tattered application form. Clyde looked him over, raised a skeptical eyebrow at his scrawny frame, but ultimately decided he might be worth a try. "We feed you lunch, and we pay you $2 a day. You last longer than a week. Maybe you'll get a $1 raise," Clyde said. For a wanderer like Zachariah, it was more than fair. He trudged out of town that evening, following a narrow road lined with scraggly bushes that led to the sprawling Hamilton Ranch. Past the main gate, he saw rolling hills dotted with cattle, wide paddocks, and a massive barn that towered over the fields. It wasn't the biggest ranch he'd ever seen, but it was easily the best maintained. Like a well-kept secret, the ranch seemed to glow under the setting sun. He was instructed to meet Miss Maribel Hamilton, the lady of the house, after he cleaned up. He imagined her to be some middle-aged matron, but her advanced age never even crossed his mind. He didn't know she was 71 years old. He'd heard rumors of a rich widow who'd inherited the entire property after her father and brother passed. Some said she was tough as nails. Some said she was cursed. All Zachariah knew was that she had money to pay him, and that was all he cared about. The next morning, Zachariah stood by a corral, trying to brush a stubborn mare that kept nipping at his shirt. A rustle of petticoats and a cool voice startled him. "That mare's a feisty one. You gotta hold her muzzle gentle but firm." He turned around to find Maribel Hamilton. She was taller than he expected, standing upright despite her age. Her silver hair was neatly braided and pinned. A crisp white blouse tucked into a long brown skirt gave her a businesslike air, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, were what truly caught his attention. For a moment, Zachariah forgot to speak. Everything about her was commanding, from her posture to her tone. Yet there was something behind those eyes, a glimmer of loneliness, or perhaps curiosity. He recovered his senses, doffing his hat. One morning, she walked over to the mare, steadied the horse's head, and motioned for Zachariah to resume brushing. "Call me Miss Maribel or Miss Hamilton," she said, her voice carrying the faintest quiver of the refined East Coast education her father once insisted she get. "I hope Clyde ain't working you too hard." He shrugged. "I can handle it, Mom. I'm grateful for the chance." His eyes dropped to the dusty ground. Despite her years, he found an air of quiet authority in her that was almost magnetic. Maybe it was the fact she alone oversaw such a huge spread. Or maybe he was just in awe of anyone with a stable life and enough money to hire a drifter like him. She raised an eyebrow. "We'll see what you're made of. Hamilton Ranch isn't for the faint of heart." That was the first conversation they had. Brief, almost mundane. But for Zachariah, it was the strangest sensation he felt. Noticed, acknowledged in a way he hadn't felt in years. That night, lying in the bunkhouse among the other wranglers, he found himself thinking of her silver hair catching the sunlight, the way she had steadied that horse without so much as a flinch. He told himself it was just respect, like a ranch hand would hold for his boss. Little did he know it was the seed of something else altogether. Days turned into weeks. Zachariah found the work exhausting, yet fulfilling. He repaired fences, herded cattle, and even helped brand a new set of calves. By the end of each day, sweat soaked his shirt. But the pay was good, and the ranch provided decent meals. One evening, as the sky burned in a sunset of purples and oranges, Maribel invited Zachariah to sit on the porch of the main house after dinner. He was hesitant. None of the other hands seemed to have received such an invitation, but Miss Maribel insisted, so he washed up and made his way to the grand porch. A rocking chair and a small table with a pitcher of iced tea awaited him. Maribel sat on another rocker, lightly swaying. He took a seat, feeling awkward, yet honored. "Thank you, ma'am," he mumbled. She poured tea into 2 tall glasses. "I'd like to hear about your life," she said, passing him a glass. "Where'd you come from? How'd you end up at my ranch?" Zachariah hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his past. But the gentle evening breeze and the quiet sincerity in her eyes made him open up. He told her of losing his parents, drifting around the frontier, and never staying in one place long enough to build a future. He admitted he felt tired of wandering, tired of never having a place to call home. Maribel's gaze turned distant as he spoke. Then she told him stories of her father, who built Hamilton Ranch with his bare hands, and a small fortune from a silver mine in Colorado. She recalled her own youth, how she once yearned to see the East Coast again, but ended up tethered to the land after her brother died in a stampede. She had inherited it all, thousands of acres of grassland and cattle, a small empire in the making. But money couldn't buy her a family, nor fill the emptiness of a large house with no children or siblings. The sun dipped below the horizon. Crickets began their nightly chorus. Zachariah felt a pull toward her words. He recognized in Maribel a loneliness that matched his own. She may have been decades older, but heartbreak and isolation had made them equals in suffering. At some point, he placed his calloused hand atop hers. The moment felt both strange and comforting, a silent acknowledgement that they both deserved a bit of warmth in this hard, dusty world. She said nothing, but she didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she returned a faint smile. That night, after returning to the bunkhouse, Zachariah lay awake thinking of that gentle pressure of her hand. How for the first time since he was a boy, he felt like someone saw him not just as a hired hand, but as a man. With a beating heart, rumors started fluttering around the ranch like moths around a lantern. The ranch hands snickered about how the new wrangler's aiming to be the lady's favorite. Some teased Zachariah outright, suggesting he was after her money, but he found himself drawn to her, day after day, as if guided by some invisible force. The aging heiress and the young cowboy spent more evenings on that porch, sharing stories and secrets. One night, Zachariah mustered the courage to ask Maribel, "Ever think of leaving this place behind? Maybe traveling, seeing the world?" A sad smile lined her face. "Hamilton, ranch is all I've ever known. The land is in my blood, my father's legacy. I can't leave it, even if I sometimes want to." He nodded. He understood what it was to feel bound to something, even if that bond was forged by tragedy. Day by day, the bond between them grew. He fixed squeaky steps on her porch, brought her fresh flowers from the nearby meadow, and once on a day, the ranch hands had off. He took her to see the newly built train station near Dodge City, a small taste of the bustling world beyond her ranch. Her eyes sparkled like a young girl's at the sight of the massive locomotives chugging in and out. Those who saw them in town whispered, "An old woman with a younger man." It was scandalous for the era, but Maribel didn't seem to care. She walked with a dignity and confidence that left no room for shame. If the stairs hurt her, she never showed it. At the ranch, the pair discovered a shared love for music. Maribel had an old upright piano in her parlor, and though her fingers were arthritic, she still managed to play a few melodies. Zachariah, who'd once listened to traveling minstrels, tried to sing along. On the surface, it must have looked absurd. A 71-year-old woman with a near penniless cowboy. Yet in that moment, they simply laughed, forgetting their differences and the world's disapproval. It wasn't long before Maribel asked Zachariah to move out of the bunkhouse and into a guest room in the main house. The ranch hands rolled their eyes, sure the new wrangler had manipulated the boss's affections for his own gain. Zachariah told himself it wasn't about the money. He found a sense of comfort with her, something that had eluded him in all his years of wandering. She in turn discovered a reason to rise each morning. Someone to share her solitary domain with. 2 months after Zachariah first rode through the ranch gates, Maribel fell ill with a fever. She refused to call the town doctor until the pain became too intense to ignore. Zachariah stayed at her bedside through her delirious nights, cooling her forehead with damp cloths, coaxing her to drink water when she woke in panicked sweats. The ranch house staff marveled at his devotion, cynical as some might have been. None could deny the tenderness in his eyes whenever he gazed upon her frail figure. Dr. Caldwell arrived from Dodge City, diagnosing a severe case of pneumonia. As Maribel's coughing fits rattled her body, Zachariah felt a dread he hadn't experienced since his parents' death. He prayed each night, gripping her hand, pleading silently for her recovery. Slowly she improved. On the evening she finally stood from her bed, leaning on a cane. Zachariah couldn't hide his joy. "Welcome back," he whispered, helping her to a chair near the bedroom window, which overlooked the rolling fields of the ranch. It was in that quiet moment, with the window open to a gentle breeze, that he blurted the words, "Marry me." She stared at him as if she couldn't believe her ears. "Don't be foolish," she said, after a moment, her voice weak from illness, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of longing. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his own. "I know what people might think," he began, his voice trembling. "But I also know what's in my heart. I never thought I'd find a home. You are my home, Maribel. Let me take care of you. Let me give you the love you deserve." Tears shimmered in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. "I'm an old woman, Zachariah," she whispered. "Old enough to be your grandmother. That doesn't matter," he insisted. "Not to me. I don't want your money. I just want you to be happy for however long we got." She looked away, out into the endless fields of the ranch her father built. Maybe she saw ghosts of her past. Maybe she saw all the lonely night she'd endured. Finally she turned back to him and gave a slow nod, tears slipping down her cheeks. "If you're certain," she said, her voice trembling then. "Yes." They sealed their engagement with a tender kiss, and Zachariah felt a surge of emotion that made him believe, for the first time in years, that life could be kind. News traveled fast. A small wedding was held at the ranch chapel, a modest wooden structure set behind the main house. The ceremony took place at sunrise with only a handful of ranch staff, a preacher and a couple of townsfolk in attendance. Maribel wore a lavender gown, her silver hair pinned up in a soft bun. Zachariah wore a simple suit that Clyde, the ranch foreman, had helped him pick out in Dodge City. Whispers abounded. "He's only after her inheritance. It's downright unnatural. She's too old to get married again." But under the warm rays of dawn, with the church bell softly ringing, Zachariah and Maribel said their vows. The preacher spoke of love, transcending boundaries, of how the Lord works in mysterious ways. When they exchanged rings, Maribel's hand trembled in his, and Zachariah felt his heart might burst with equal parts joy and terror. He couldn't ignore the nagging voice in his head that wondered if he was doing the right thing. The cynics in town had planted seeds of doubt. But when Maribel looked at him with tearful eyes and whispered, "I do," every doubt vanished in the silent hush of her devotion. After a modest breakfast reception, the new couple retreated into the main house. Ranch hands doffed their hats, muttering either congratulations or curses under their breath. Zachariah noticed Clyde and a few others exchanging glances. None approached him to celebrate, and a cold weight settled in his chest. He realized that from this day forward, everything would be different. Married life began quietly. Zachariah attended to ranch chores in the morning and spent his afternoons managing errands for Maribel, balancing the books, meeting suppliers, handling the wages of the ranch hands. She insisted on teaching him the business side of Hamilton Ranch. He listened intently, taking notes on her father's old ledgers and record-keeping system. One afternoon, barely a week after their wedding, Zachariah found himself in a back room of the ranch house, searching for a stack of receipts. The room was cluttered with relics, broken chairs, an old trunk, dusty books, and a locked oak cabinet. The smell of mothballs hung heavy in the air. A single window let in a ray of sunlight that danced across the floor, illuminating floating specks of dust. He rummaged through some drawers, eventually coming across the receipts he needed. But something else caught his eye, a glint of metal from the partially open trunk. Curious, he lifted the trunk's lid, revealing a jumble of old diaries, photographs, and a small box wrapped in cloth. Intrigued, he pulled out the box. It was heavier than he expected. Upon unwrapping it, he discovered a locked metal container with ornate carvings. The top bore the name Hamilton in elaborate script. It didn't look like a jewelry box, more like a safe deposit box or a personal vault. He shook it gently. Something inside clanked, as if metallic objects were tumbling around. A sudden guilt washed over him. He was prying into Maribel's personal effects. He started to place it back when the corner of an old photo slid out from beneath the diaries, featuring a young woman who looked eerily like Maribel, standing beside a tall man wearing a Stetson hat. The date scrawled on the back read 1891. Confusion tangled in Zachariah's mind. He knew Maribel had never married before. At least that was what the rumors said. But the photograph told a different story. Heart-pounding, he snapped the trunk shut and returned the box to where he found it. He quickly gathered the receipts and left the room, sweat beading on his forehead. Something about that trunk gnawed at him. Why was that metal box locked away? Who was the man in the photograph? Days passed, but his curiosity only grew. He tried to broach the topic gently, with Maribel asking about her youth. She kept her answers vague, turning the conversation to the ranch finances. It was as though a shadow fell over her face whenever he hinted at her past. The man in the photograph remained a silent enigma, and the locked metal container loomed in Zachariah's thoughts, compelling him to learn more. The turning point came one evening when Maribel said she had to visit her cousin in a neighboring county for a couple of days. She left Zachariah in charge of the ranch, trusting him with the day-to-day operations. He kissed her goodbye at dawn and watched her carriage roll out the front gate, feeling a pang of guilt for the excitement stirring inside him. Now, with the house virtually to himself, he had the chance to uncover the mystery. He waited until nightfall, when the ranch hands were all asleep or out carousing. Stealthily, he made his way to the back room where he had found the trunk. He carried a small lantern, its flame flickering with every anxious breath. When he reached the trunk, he carefully lifted the lid, removing the diaries and the metal box once again. He placed the diaries on an old table, flipping through yellowed pages. The earliest entries were from the late 1840s, written by someone named Ezekiel Hamilton Maribel's father. They detailed the purchase of lands, dealings with local tribes, and the early struggles of building the ranch. Then the entries shifted to Maribel's mother, Mary, who described the joys and sorrows of raising 2 children on the frontier. But a series of later entries, penned in Maribel's own slanted script, painted a grim picture. She wrote of a secret courtship with a ranch hand named Jonas Mulligan. He was hired in 1866, the year after the Civil War ended, and quickly became the focus of her affections, despite her father's stern disapproval. The diaries spoke of clandestine meetings by the creek-stolen kisses under the barn's rafters, and plans to run away together if her father refused their union. Zachariah's heart pounded as he read further. According to the diary, Maribel became pregnant. She and Jonas had decided to elope, but tragedy struck in the shape of a violent confrontation between Jonas and Maribel's father. The father discovered the pregnancy, flew into a rage, and threatened Jonas with a shotgun if he ever set foot on the ranch again. Jonas tried to fight back. A bullet was fired. Jonas was left to bleed in the dust near the ranch gate. Maribel, frantic and heartbroken, scrawled entries of her anguish. Jonas died in her arms, and her father forced her into a sanatorium in Kansas City to deal with the pregnancy. The diaries grew more cryptic as the months progressed. The final mention simply read, "I lost my child. God have mercy on me." Zachariah felt sick. He glanced at the metal box. His trembling fingers rummaged through the diaries for a key, eventually discovering a tiny brass one taped to the back cover of the final diary. Heart hammering, he slid the key into the container's lock. It clicked. Inside, he found documents sealed in a wax envelope, labeled Jonas Mulligan Estate. Also inside was a small bundle of letters, each addressed to Maribel in Jonas's handwriting. Sifting through them, Zachariah uncovered a deed to a strip of land near the Texas border, left to Jonas by a great-uncle. The envelope also contained a silver locket. When Zachariah pried it open, a faded photograph of Jonas stared back at him, next to a tiny image of Maribel in her youth. But the strangest item was a second envelope with the word Clemency written in an elegant hand. Inside was a letter from an adoption agency in St. Louis, dated 1868, referencing a baby girl delivered to them. The letter stated that Ezekiel Hamilton paid a significant sum to ensure the child was placed in a good family, and that all ties to the Hamilton name were severed. Zachariah's breath caught Maribel's child, survived given away in secret. Did she know, or did her father lie to her? The diaries ended with her believing the baby was lost. If she had known the baby lived, it would have changed everything. The possibility that Maribel's father had manipulated her entire life revolted Zachariah. He spent the night pacing, wrestling with the decision of what to do next. Should he confront Maribel? Tell her the truth? The guilt of prying into her most painful secrets weighed on him, yet the burden of knowledge threatened to swallow him whole. Maribel came back 2 days later, looking pleased with her visit. As she and Zachariah sat for tea that evening, he studied her face, seeing anew the sorrow that lurked behind her composed facade. How could he keep such a revelation from her Maribel? He began gently setting his teacup down. I found something while you were away. Something about your past. She stiffened immediately, suspicion and a hint of fear flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? She asked, her voice cautious. He swallowed hard. I stumbled upon your diaries, and a metal box I didn't mean to pry, but I couldn't help myself. Her hands shook tea sloshing in her cup. That box is private, Zachariah. I never wanted anyone to see it. I know, he said softly, sliding his chair closer. But there's something in there you need to see. She was silent for a long moment, anger and pain battling in her expression. Finally, she set down her tea. Show me. They walked together to the back room where he pulled out the diaries and the contents of the metal box. For nearly an hour, Maribel read over the letter from the adoption agency, tears staining the brittle parchment. She stared at the silver locket, as if it might speak to her. When she finally looked up at Zachariah, her face was ashen, her eyes hollow. They lied to me, she whispered. All these years I believed my baby died. Father told me so. He said it was God's will. Her voice cracked under the weight of her betrayal. Zachariah knelt beside her. I'm so sorry, he murmured, unsure what else to say. Her cheeks burned with fresh tears. I loved Jonas. We had a chance at happiness. But Father took everything from me. Jonas, my child. My entire life has been built on his lies. Zachariah gathered her into his arms. He felt her trembling as though decades of suppressed agony were pouring out. Part of him wished he'd never found that box, that he could spare her this newfound torment. But he also knew the truth needed to be set free. In the days that followed, Maribel was haunted by the revelation. She spent hours locked in her room, sorting through old letters and diaries, reading them again and again, as if searching for an explanation or closure. The ranch staff noticed her grief-stricken demeanor, but dared not ask what troubled her. Zachariah took over nearly all ranch operations, providing her the space she so desperately needed. One morning, Maribel emerged from her room with a new resolve. I must find her. She declared, my daughter Zachariah, nodded, though a lead from an adoption agency. Nearly 4 decades old, seemed like a needle in a haystack. We'll try, he promised. We'll go to St. Louis. Follow any clue we can find. Maribel's grip on his arm tightened. I don't have many years left. Zachariah. If there's any chance she's alive, I need to see her. And if that means selling the ranch to fund our search, I'll do it." He reeled. "You'd sell Hamilton Ranch, your legacy." Tears filled her eyes. "You're my husband. You know what this means to me. A part of me still belongs to Jonas, and that part is my daughter. The ranch was Father's dream, but my child, she's mine." Though Zachariah understood her desperation, he was startled by her determination to sacrifice her entire inheritance. Yet he saw no alternative. There was no easy way to track down a grown woman who might be anywhere on the continent. They would need money, travel private investigators, and Hamilton Ranch was the biggest asset Maribel had when word spread through the ranch that Maribel was considering selling the entire operation, buzzed with tension. Clyde, the foreman, was furious. "This land's been in her family for generations." He spat at Zachariah, cornering him by the stables. "What kind of scheme are you running? Maribel never showed any interest in selling until you showed up." Zachariah stiffened, anger flaring. "This isn't about me. Miss Maribel has a right to do what she wants." Clyde scoffed. "You wormed your way into her heart, into her will, and now you'll strip this ranch for every dime, won't you?" The accusation stung. The other ranch hands, some of whom had been with the Hamilton family for years, muttered similar sentiments. In town, the gossip grew even more vicious. "Young drifter manipulates wealthy widow. She's selling everything for him." They painted Zachariah as a gold digger, fueling a rumor mill that threatened to tarnish both his name and Maribel's. Maribel too faced harsh backlash from acquaintances who thought her mind had gone feeble. "At your age, you want to run off after a phantom from your youth?" they scolded. But she remained unwavering, even though Zachariah saw the toll it took on her. She confided in him, nightly clinging to the hope of reuniting with her daughter through a contact in Dodge City. Maribel found a local businessman, Josiah Bingham, who expressed interest in buying the ranch. He offered a large sum enough to fund their search several times over. Maribel's hands trembled. Signing the preliminary agreement, she insisted on one last ride across the fields before finalizing the deal. So on a crisp morning, she and Zachariah rode side by side through the rolling hills of Hamilton Ranch, the place that held her entire life's memories, both joyous and tragic. She gazed upon the grazing cattle, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the barn she had helped paint as a young girl. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she bid silent farewells to each corner of the property. Zachariah took her hand in his. "You sure about this?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice soft. "My only regret is not knowing sooner, but I can't let fear or guilt stop me now." The next day, she signed the final papers, relinquishing ownership of Hamilton Ranch. A hush fell over the staff. Some wept, others grumbled, or left searching for new work. Clyde refused to meet Zachariah's eyes, certain that the cowboy had orchestrated the entire ordeal. By the week's end, Zachariah and Maribel packed their belongings into a wagon. The new owner would allow them a month to fully vacate, but Maribel refused to linger, as if staying on the land would only deepen the wound. They began their journey eastward first, by wagon to the train station near Dodge City, then onward to St. Louis, carrying with them the diaries, the metal box, and a burning determination to unravel the final secrets of her child's fate. Arriving in St. Louis was a shock to their senses. The city bustled with factories, streetcars, and a population that dwarfed the small towns Zachariah had known. Smoke and steam filled the air, and crowds jostled them at every turn. Yet somewhere, amid these throngs of people, might lie the answer. Maribel needed. She hired a private investigator, named Barnaby Fitch, a wiry man with a waxed moustache and suspicious eyes. He listened to Maribel's story with professional detachment, scribbling notes in a small ledger. "You're looking for a woman who would be in her early 40s, given up for adoption in 1868. Fitch summarized, "No name, no known adoptive parents, only an agency letter from the same year, tall order." Maribel set her jaw. "Whatever it costs, we'll pay. My father's hush money must have left some records behind." Fitch shrugged. "We'll see about that." For weeks, Zachariah and Maribel stayed in a modest boarding house, waiting as Fitch pursued every lead. They visited old adoption agency buildings, scoured city archives, and talked to nuns who once ran orphanages. They found scraps of records indicating a baby girl named Clemency was placed with a traveling preacher and his wife, who later moved west. No one knew the couple's final destination. Some said they died of cholera. Others claimed they'd gone to California. Each dead end weighed heavily on Maribel, though she tried to remain stoic. Her eyes betrayed her despair. The city offered no comfort. Strangers stared at the elderly woman clinging to the arm of her younger husband. Zachariah ignored their glances, focusing on supporting her knights, found her sobbing in his arms, mourning both Jonas and the daughter she might never find. As the bills for Barnaby Fitch's services piled up, Zachariah began to worry. Even with the money from selling Hamilton Ranch, the costs of living in a large city and funding endless searches were chipping away at their funds. More alarming, a rift was forming between them. Maribel grew distant sometimes, snapping at him, or withdrawing into silence for hours at a time. One evening he confronted her. "Why are you pushing me away?" he asked, his voice raw with concern. "We're in this together." She looked at him with tired eyes. "I'm old Zachariah. You should be living your life, not chasing ghosts with me." Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I am just an old fool, dragging you down. His heart twisted. "Don't say that I chose this life when I married you." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I love you, but I can't stop thinking I've ruined your future. You deserve more than a bitter old woman." He clasped her hands rough from years of ranch work. "Age doesn't matter, I want you, that's it." He kissed her trembling lips, trying to reassure her that they could weather any storm. She nodded, leaning into him, but a small voice inside him wondered if his words could truly mend the wounds that time and circumstance had inflicted. Just when hope seemed lost, Barnaby Fitch brought surprising news. He'd tracked down a family named Henderson, who claimed to have briefly housed a girl named Clemency in the early 1880s. They lived now in Jefferson City, a few hours north by train. Maribel and Zachariah packed their bags that same day, racing to the station in a flurry of renewed hope. Jefferson City was smaller than St. Louis, its Central Avenue lined with modest storefronts and brick houses. The Hendersons, an elderly couple, welcomed them into a cozy parlor. As soon as Maribel showed them the adoption letter, Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit with recognition. "Yes, yes, Clemency," she said, clasping Maribel's hands. "She was already grown when she stayed with us, around 14 or 15 at the time. I believe her adoptive parents died in a fever outbreak. We took her in for a year, taught her to read and sew. Then a traveling group of Methodists came through, offering to take her to a missionary school out west. She was always so eager to see the world, she left with them." Maribel's face flickered with both hope and heartache. "Do you know where they were heading?" she asked breathlessly. Mrs. Henderson shook her head. They mentioned Oregon. "But I'm not certain. It was a small clue, but a clue. Nonetheless, The group parted with tearful hugs, and Maribel thanked the Hendersons profusely. That evening, in their rented room above a tailor's shop, she and Zachariah pored over maps, planning their route. West Oregon was a vast territory. Finding clemency, there would be like chasing the wind. Yet Maribel's eyes blazed with determination. "I've come too far," she told Zachariah. "I can't give up now." He squeezed her hand. "Then we'll go to Oregon." Traveling across the country was no small feat. They took a train to Denver, then another to Salt Lake City, each leg draining more of their dwindling funds. Along the way, Maribel's health deteriorated. She suffered persistent coughing fits, a grim echo of the pneumonia that nearly claimed her. Zachariah feared for her life, urging her to rest in each city they visited, but she refused to delay, insisting they had no time to waste. In Salt Lake City, they found a small lead from a Methodist registry that placed a missionary party in the Idaho Territory around 1884, which might have included a young woman named Clemency. Eagerly, they pressed on, hiring a wagon to travel into Idaho. Harsh weather, rough terrain, and Maribel's frailty turned the journey into a grueling ordeal. Zachariah nearly lost hope when she collapsed one evening, feverish and disoriented. They made camp by a river, the wagon's wheel deep in mud. He prayed over her memories of his parents, final days haunting him. She stabilized by morning, but each day was a new gamble with her life. By the time they reached a small settlement in the Oregon Territory, they had spent most of the money from the ranch sale. Zachariah tried to remain optimistic, but a gnawing guilt and desperation consumed him. Maribel's health was clearly failing. The search for clemency seemed endless. In the settlement's only doctor's clinic, the physician told Zachariah in hushed tones that Maribel's lungs were severely compromised. "She needs rest and proper treatment," he warned, "or you'll lose her." Zachariah returned to their rented shack where Maribel lay under blankets, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. He couldn't hold back tears. "We can't keep going like this," he implored. "Your life is more important than this search." She managed a sad smile. "If I don't find her, or at least try, until my dying breath, what life do I have anyway?" He sank onto the bed beside her, kissing her clammy forehead. Their marriage had started with hope, but now it felt like a tragic race against time. If he lost her, he'd lose the only person who ever truly understood him. Just when darkness threatened to swallow them entirely, a letter arrived at the local post office, addressed to Maribel. The sender was Barnaby Fitch. After they left St. Louis, Fitch had continued his investigation. He tracked down church records and discovered a clemency mulligan associated with a missionary outpost near the Oregon coast in a town called Redwood Bay. Fitch had written in a rush, urging them to head there immediately. Maribel clutched the letter to her chest. "This is it," she whispered. "We're so close." Her frail body trembled with renewed vigor. Though Redwood Bay was still 100 miles away, Zachariah saw a spark in Maribel's eyes that he hadn't seen in weeks. He arranged for another wagon, scraping together the last of their funds, and they set out once more, clinging to the faint hope that at the end of this road waited clemency, the daughter Maribel had believed lost for decades. The end of a road, the shattering of a hope. The sky over Redwood Bay was the color of steel gray, brooding and infinite. The scent of salt and pine drifted through the wind as Zachariah guided the weary wagon down the final hill. Maribel sat beside him, wrapped in layers of wool, her breath shallow, but eyes fixed ahead with trembling anticipation. The town was modest, a scattering of weathered wooden homes hugging the Pacific cliffs. And beyond them, perched on a bluff like a guardian over the crashing waves, stood the missionary outpost. Its whitewashed walls gleamed faintly in the coastal mist, a beacon at the end of their long, punishing journey. Zachariah helped Maribel down from the wagon, her frail frame nearly collapsing under her own weight. But she would not rest. Not yet. "This is it," she whispered, her voice, a ghost in the wind. "She's here, I can feel it." Together, they climbed the stone steps to the outpost's doors. Zachariah knocked, with the strength she no longer had. A moment later, a kind-eyed elderly man opened the door. Father McAdams. The lines in his face deepened as he took in the couple before him, especially the fire barely clinging to Maribel's eyes. She clutched the worn letter from Barnaby Fitch. "I'm looking for Clemency," she said, almost breathless. "Clemency Mulligan, my daughter, father." McAdams's lips parted with recognition, and then gently pressed into a sad line. He ushered them inside without a word. The room was warm, but the silence chilled the air. "We did have a Clemency," he said, voice soft as the sea breeze. "She served here for many years, a gentle soul. She taught the children, helped in the infirmary, sang hymns on Sundays. Everyone loved her." Maribel's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Please, where is she?" The pause was a thunderclap in Zachariah's heart. "She passed away last winter. Pneumonia took her. We buried her in the church cemetery, just up the hill." For a moment, no one moved. The words settled like ash in the air. Then Maribel let out a sound Zachariah would never forget. "Part. Gasp part. Cry part." The breaking of a soul. Her knees buckled, and he caught her before she hit the floor. She pressed her face into his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "No. No, please. Not now. Not when we're here." He held her arms wrapped tightly around her shaking body, eyes stinging with tears of his own. They had crossed rivers, sold a legacy, defied time and age, and they were too late. Far, far too late. Father McAdams placed a hand on Zachariah's shoulder. "She left something," he said softly. "For you. For her mother. If she ever came." He returned with a small wooden chest. Maribel, still trembling, opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a worn Bible, a few letters, and a faded photograph. Clemency's gentle smile radiating from within the grainy frame. In her face, Maribel saw Jonas, saw herself, saw the lost decades. One of the letters was addressed simply, "To the mother I never knew." Maribel unfolded it like scripture, eyes devouring every word Clemency had wondered, had searched, had hoped she had known there was someone out there, someone who loved her from the very beginning. And though she never found Maribel, she wrote, "If you ever read this, know that I forgive you. I hope life gave you peace. I hope you never stopped searching. I hope you loved someone truly and that someone loved you back." The letter trembled in Maribel's hands. "I did," she whispered. "I did." Zachariah knelt beside her, tears streaking his cheeks. There were no words to soothe this pain, no miracle left to grant, only the quiet mercy of knowing Clemency had lived a good life, and had left the door open, even in death. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs, as if mourning with them. The sun pierced the clouds for a moment, casting light on the path to the small cemetery on the hill. And in that golden hush, they knew exactly where they had to go next. Father McAdams helped them inside the outpost, offering tea and a warm place to rest. He explained that Clemency, knowing she was gravely ill, left a sealed box with instructions that if anyone from her birth family ever came looking for her, they should have it. The preacher retrieved a small wooden chest and handed it to Maribel's hands. Trembling, Maribel opened the chest to find a worn Bible, a few letters, and a faded photograph of a woman in her 30s, presumably Clemency, smiling with a gentle warmth. The letters were addressed simply to my birth mother. In one letter, Clemency wrote of her longing to know her origins. She had discovered some records suggesting her birth mother might be from Kansas, but she never had the resources to trace it further. She described her life as a teacher, her deep faith, and her acceptance that God's plan might not include meeting my birth family, but I hope they find peace and forgiveness for themselves and for me. Maribel wept uncontrollably, pressing the letters to her heart. She had arrived too late to embrace her daughter, but she finally had tangible proof that Clemency had lived, thrived, and died as a gracious, loving woman. In her final letter, Clemency wrote of a small sum of money she had saved from teaching and a modest plot of land near Redwood Bay that the church had given her. She bequeathed it all to her birth mother, if that person ever came. It was nothing compared to the fortune Hamilton Ranch once represented, but it was enough to provide a simple living for Maribel and Zachariah in Redwood Bay. As Maribel clutched the box of her daughter's inheritance, a bitter realization struck Zachariah. They had spent nearly everything to find Clemency. They sold the ranch, endured suspicion and scorn, and traveled across half the country only to arrive after Clemency's death. The hard karma of his choices settled over him like a storm cloud. Had he not encouraged Maribel's obsession, maybe they could have saved the ranch, or at least let Maribel live out her remaining years in comfort. Instead, they found heartbreak. He watched Maribel cough into a kerchief, noticing the flecks of blood. Her health was hanging by a thread. If anything, their new inheritance was just enough for them to survive in Redwood Bay, but not enough to return to any place else in style or comfort. One afternoon, as Maribel lay weakly on a cot in the outpost, Zachariah overheard Father McAdams discussing the property's caretaker position. The outpost needed someone to watch over the small farmland and the church grounds. The older caretaker recently retired, moving in with family. Realizing they had no funds to travel again, Zachariah volunteered. That would be an answered prayer, Father McAdams said, relief in his voice. It felt like karmic retribution. Zachariah, who once dreamed of wealth and a stable life, found himself with a meager plot of land in a remote corner of the Oregon coast, a far cry from Hamilton Ranch's sprawling fields. Yet in the midst of his guilt and sorrow, he found a strange comfort in Redwood Bay's wind-swept vistas. Here at least Maribel could be near the final resting place of her daughter, a chance for some measure of peace. Time passed slowly in Redwood Bay. Zachariah tended, the farmland grew vegetables, and helped maintain the outpost in exchange for a small monthly stipend. Maribel's cough worsened, but her spirit found solace in visiting Clemency's grave, leaving flowers and speaking softly, as if her daughter might hear her from beyond. The final days of Maribel's life came quietly. One evening she asked Zachariah to walk with her along the cliff overlooking the ocean, bundled in warm blankets. She leaned on his arm, each step a monumental effort. "I don't regret marrying you," she whispered, her voice cracking in the coastal wind. "Even if our journey was filled with sorrow, at least I wasn't alone." He blinked away tears. "I wish I could have saved you from all this pain." She looked out at the vast, untamed sea. "Pain was always there, but you gave me something I never thought I'd have again. Love, companionship, and closure." She squeezed his hand. "I hope you find happiness after I'm gone. Promise me you'll live, that you won't waste away like I did burdened by the past. He couldn't speak. Instead, he held her closer, feeling the frailty of her body. In that moment, the wild ocean crashing against the cliffs felt like a fitting backdrop, a reminder that life, in all its tumult and beauty, eventually returns to the great unknown. She passed in her sleep, a few nights later, a faint smile on her lips. Zachariah buried her beside Clemency, fulfilling her last wish to rest near the daughter she found, too late. As the gravedigger patted down the final mound of earth, Zachariah stood by the grave, numb with loss. He'd lost the ranch, the inheritance, and the woman he truly loved. Yet, in a strange way, it all felt like a circle completing itself, Maribel at last reunited with Jonas and Clemency in the afterlife. At peace. The wave of karmic justice had come and gone, leaving Zachariah behind with a battered heart and a quiet sense of atonement. Months later, Redwood Bay had become his home. He woke each morning, tending the farmland left to Maribel by Clemency, feeling the salt breeze on his face. He maintained the church grounds, helped Father McAdams with minor repairs, and often found himself gazing at the twin headstones of Maribel and Clemency, side by side under a tall cedar tree. His youth still offered the promise of a long future. He had no illusions of grandeur, no more get-rich schemes, no more restlessness. Instead, he focused on simple labors and silent reflections, occasionally recalling the ranch days with a wistful smile. Some nights he would read Maribel's diaries by lantern light. He learned of her fierce love for Jonas, the heartbreak that shaped her life, and her final mission to find her daughter. Then he would close the diaries, step outside, and stare at the vast ocean under a canopy of stars. In that endless expanse, he sensed the faint echo of Maribel's presence, a reminder that love, no matter how fraught, was worth the journey. The story of the poor cowboy who married a 71-year-old ranch heiress had become a local legend among the few townsfolk in Redwood Bay. Some whispered it as a tragedy, others as a cautionary tale of how fortune can vanish as quickly as the tides. But for Zachariah Jones, it was a love story, one he would never trade, no matter how harshly karma had struck in the end. Hardship, secrets, and sacrifice colored Zachariah Jones's union with Maribel Hamilton, proving that even the grandest fortunes can't shield us from the shadows of fate. In the twilight of her years, Maribel found the courage to uncover a lost daughter's path, even if it broke her heart. By the time Zachariah laid her to rest by Clemency's grave, he realized the greatest wealth they shared wasn't her inheritance, but the steadfast love between them. His new life along the rugged Oregon coast stands as a solemn reminder that redemption and purpose often grow from life's harshest lessons. If this wild, twisting tale of devotion and destiny captured your heart, do us a favor, like this video. Share it with friends who crave a frontier drama, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories from unexpected corners of history. Your support keeps these tales alive, and we'll keep bringing you the stories that stir the soul and spark the imagination. Thank you, partner, for riding with us.